just always keep that in mind. Okay. So again, I'm on Windows. I know most people in here use Mac, but it's just I just kind of have my setup here that it makes the class a little bit easier to teach, because sometimes I teach programming classes too, you know, and it's just easier to have everything set up here. So let's do this. Does everyone have a text editor that they like or they don't know how to get a hold of? So if you don't, I would say the default preference would be a text editor called Brackets. So if you go in the course under links, by the way, you are welcome to bring your own laptops. I know some people just prefer your own laptops, so you can do that. Sometimes on the midterm and final, sometimes I say yes, sometimes I say no, depending on, you know, if I see anything weird going on as far as cheating. So if you're on Windows, there's a pre-zipped version of Brackets. You're welcome to use that. Or if you're on Mac, you can just go to the Brackets website, click download. If you have Sublime Text, get that open and started. And any other text editors anybody likes? Okay. So I'll just give everyone about 30 seconds to get settled. Just make sure that you have a working text editor, because again, we're going to do a lot of live coding. I would also suggest, this was from the fall. Give me a second, let me close this. So I would suggest making a dedicated folder. Just to be lazy, and put it on my desktop. You can put in your documents if you have a flash drive. But just right now, I would suggest making a CGS4828 folder. And then just each week make a folder with that date. So today is the 7th, so we'll do 1/7/2019. And then that way all your examples from that day are in that folder. It just kind of keeps you a little bit more organized. So you probably noticed there's no formal book for the course. I'm just going to kind of give you links throughout the course. We're probably going to spend about 80% of our time, maybe even more, at W3 Schools. I'm sure many of you are familiar with W3 Schools. Okay. And so we're going to start off with Learn HTML. This is mostly just going to be a review. I'll try to go kind of slow on some of these things. I don't try to, if I go too slow, then people start going on their phones and doing other stuff. So let me know if I'm going too fast at any point, but I'll try to kind of keep a good pace. So is everybody at this HTML5 tutorial? And they have this cool little try it yourself button. You can't really make pages of any significant size, but it is kind of a cool little useful thing if you want to just test like some new concept out that you don't know about. Like say there's a new piece of CSS that you're learning that you never heard about. Like say for example you're trying out linear gradients and you don't want to make a whole new fresh web page and try it out. You just want to click the little try it button and try out linear gradients. This is pretty cool for that. Okay. So in this case, I'm not going to really make you memorize all this boilerplate code. Okay. For the most part, most of the time we're just going to be working with the body of the page. Later on, when we have to insert like external JavaScript and CSS and from other places like from WordPress and stuff like that, we will have to work in the head section, but let's not worry about that right now. Okay, so we've got our page, and this is a paragraph. Let's go ahead and add another paragraph. And then you click run, and then it's recognized. So these may seem like kind of minor things, but by default in HTML, this is what's known as white space. Anytime I hit the enter key, anytime I hit the space bar, tab, all white space inside of HTML is just collapsed down to a single space. And you probably already knew that, but just what will happen sometimes is, like, say for example, somebody, and by the way, tell me if this is at any point not large enough. Is that good enough for everybody? Okay. So here's a good example. We say this is another paragraph. Let's say, for example, I wanted it to have a bunch of spaces. What's going to happen when I click that run button? Is it going to look different or no? It's going to look the same. Okay, so just something to be aware of. There are ways to do that. There's a special, we kind of avoid this non-breaking space character, and then you can do that, but it's a little bit of a hack. We try to avoid that if we can. Our tags occur in pairs generally. There are some exceptions that we'll get to in a minute. So you can see here, I open a paragraph tag, close a paragraph tag. I'm not using terminology that nobody is familiar with, right? If I say an HTML tag, you know what I'm talking about? Okay, cool. There are two basic types of tags. There are going to be block level tags and inline tags. So let's explore that a little bit. So I'll just kind of let you know ahead of time. H1, paragraph, these are all examples of block level tags. Let's say, for example, I wanted to, so what's the tag if I want to put emphasis on something? Does anybody remember that? You're close, you're kind of in the right family. EM, right. So strong is to make it strong, EM is for emphasis. What happened with the H1s and paragraphs that did not happen when I added the emphasis tag? And again, I'm going to really drive this point home. Don't forget, all of our tags have to match. So I opened it here, closed it there. What difference did you notice?
It just makes the word another a little bit more fancy, basically a little bit more.
Yeah, so there's a stylistic difference. Think about, this is a heading. So this is a heading. We get a new line. This is a paragraph. We get a new line. Yeah. So the difference between, can anybody summarize what you think the difference between a block level and an inline tag is?
Block level starts a new line.
Exactly. So block level starts a new line, inline doesn't. And I think I've got a cheat sheet in here somewhere. You're not going to have to generally memorize these. There's actually very, very few inline. Most tend to be block level. Emphasis, span, strong, those are all inline. There's probably a few more, but most tend to be block level, okay? And I want to make sure this kind of coincides with your assignment, so every once in a while if I get quiet, I'm just making sure I cover everything here, okay? These different headings, you know how they're used, correct? Right? If I wanted to make a second level heading, and by the way, it may seem kind of obvious, but the goal is that you type what I type, and then in that folder that we just created, we save these little examples, and then you can kind of reference them for your assignment, okay? Yeah, this is still streaming, perfect, okay. So we have, this is a heading, and I guess I should be a little bit more proper. Write the word second. we've got this is a heading, this is a second level heading. What drives people crazy, I think, when you're first learning HTML is that HTML was really only ever made for structure. Any sort of visual extra stuff that you get is just kind of a side effect. It's just kind of a nice thing. Tim Berners-Lee, I don't think he ever envisioned, I don't know, maybe he did, but when he created HTML, there wasn't a whole lot of styling compared to what we have with CSS. So there was some very basic styling of things. And by default, many of these tags, we do get some default styling, right? Heading is obviously going to be a little bit larger than a second level heading. Paragraph, you may notice we actually don't really get almost any styling that I know of anyway. Emphasis, we do get some default styling. What happened to it? Kind of italicized, right? So always keep this in the back of your head. It's like one of those rules that once you get experience that you can break, but at first you want to try to adhere to it as much as possible. HTML is going to be for the structure of your page. CSS is going to purely be for visual things like colors and layouts and spacing and margins. Okay, so I'll say that one more time. HTML is going to be for the structure of your page. CSS is going to be purely about visual things. If you find yourself doing weird things with HTML to make your page look different, you're probably doing the wrong thing. Okay, this is important enough that I'm going to say it a few times. If you find yourself doing a bunch of weird things with HTML, a very good example is the BR tag. How many people have used the BR tag before? It's a very quick and easy hack to do things like that. But in my opinion, maybe this is better addressed with something like setting your margins correctly. Okay? Because actually, let's go back here for a second. Why does this violate our HTML is for structure rule? We're using break visually. We're using a tag visually. We kind of want to avoid that. Okay? Again, it's not like if you don't do it, you know, your program won't be accepted by, or your website won't be accepted and whatever. You know what I mean? It's one of those rules you can break, but you want to break very, very sparingly and not till you become experienced, okay? Quick history. We have a tag here called EM, which stands for emphasis. I'm saying I'm putting an emphasis on something. Does anybody, there's another tag called strong. Does anybody know the old names for these two tags? Somebody said an answer. Yeah, so strong was, so emphasis was I for italics. And visually, it may look the exact same. What's the difference between saying I want this italicized and I want this emphasized? What's that?
For browsers, web browsers.
They might interpret it differently.
Yeah, I think yeah, exactly. You're on the right track.
For audio purposes.
Yeah, that too. When I say I'm putting emphasis on something, that can mean a lot of things. I can style this any way I want to, and in my mind, putting emphasis on something might mean that it's red, it's underlined, whatever.
Accessibility, like disabled, like the people who are using, like you said, web users, like for like blind people who are trying to read out something if they hear the emphasis in the word.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So let me show you kind of a weird example here. If I use the I tag, and pardon me, you will see me look up CSS properties from time to time. I do not remember all of them. Okay. Okay. So we've got, this is another paragraph. This is italicized. So I'm going to do something kind of silly and pointless here, but it'll make sense by the end. And let me see if I can do this in a way that it kind of fits. So I'm going to break this up. And by the way, everyone, you know you can do this, right? Where you can take something, break it up and do multiple lines It's still basically the same thing. So here I'm just kind of breaking this up to make it a little bit more readable. So here, this italics is surrounding the word another. And here I'm just adding some inline CSS. And well, and what I'm saying is, okay, well, I want this word another. I also want it to be bold. Okay. I can't remember the... I know when I'll see it. Font style. I think I need to set it to none. Let's try font style none. Oh, sorry, it's normal. By the way, don't feel bad if you ever have to look up CSS properties. There's probably hundreds of them at this point. Okay. So what did I just do? I've got this tag for italics. And what does the word another over here look like? Right? It's kind of a completely stupid thing that I've done here because I've taken this italics tag and it's no longer italics and it's bold. So I've got it's like this weird tag where I've said I want it italicized and it's not actually italicized. With emphasis, because I'm concentrating on, I'm saying that I want this to be emphasized, that might make a little bit more sense, right? Because my interpretation of something being emphasized just might be bold. Does everyone get the difference? So there used to be a lot of tags where they described how things looked. Has anybody ever used the font tag? Okay, we try to avoid that because again, that's saying what font you're using. We want to sort of concentrate on using CSS, but that's kind of a we'll get to that a little bit more next class. So I'm just gonna, for your notes, I'm gonna give you the simplified version. All I want you to have is this version. Okay, it's a little bit simplified. I really jumped through some hoops to make that other example work. Okay, so you wouldn't actually ever do that in practice. So long story short, you get the difference, right? That HTML is for the structure of your page. CSS is for how things look, how they're laid out, and so forth. One thing that I've seen people do in the past is, let's take a step back. So what website uses headings all the time? News websites use it a lot. What website that you maybe get a huge amount of information from? If you want to look up random facts about, say, IRSC or the state of Florida or the Mississippi River, Wikipedia. So let's go to, and I hate that I can't use the IRSC page, but unfortunately, there's not enough content that it's easy to show this, okay? So Wikipedia actually uses the heading tag pretty extensively. So the top of the page, this might be an H1. This may or may not be an H1 or an H2. Okay, so let's say, for example, this is an H1. This would be a second level heading. So we're saying, okay, under history, we're looking at the founding, the expansion, and then the presidency of that person. And then we get into academics, and then we get into colleges, and then we get into a third level heading. Hopefully here you can see how they're using it for structure. What people will do sometimes is they'll do things like this, where they'll, I think I made it a little bit too large here. Oops, over here. They'll do things like, okay, this might be a second level heading, right? This might be main campus, but they decide this is just a little too large for me. I'm going to make this an H3. And you see how it changed it visually, but we changed the structure. So if you ever wanted it to be smaller, what you'd do is go back and instead you'd insert some CSS which actually made it smaller, okay? Okay, enough of that. I feel like, oops, so this is an H2. Okay, so this is the version I want you to keep for your notes. Everyone has this typed up. So so everyone's good on the difference between a block level tag and an inline tag, correct? Let's take this page here and in your favorite text editor. So if you're using brackets, what I like to do is you can actually have a dedicated folder. And I think it's Windows Plus. I can do this, okay. And so inside of brackets, you might have this little folder that says getting started, or if, you know, it might say a date or something like that. If you click this, you can open up a working folder. It actually makes life a lot easier. So I'll do that one more time. So I'm inside of brackets. If you use a different editor, that's fine. But this just makes life a little bit easier in brackets. So I click this button up here. I click Open Folder. And then remember that folder we created earlier? I made it on my desktop. Not that. Now, every time I create a new file, it automatically puts in that folder. It just makes it easier to organize. I've just seen a lot of people in the past where they create a file, and maybe one file's on their desktop, one's in their downloads, one's on their desktop, and you know they get very disorganized. Okay. So let's do this. If you're in brackets, let's go to File, New, and then paste in that HTML that we just created. Now, most of these text editors by default, they're probably not going to syntax highlight. How many people have something like that looks like this where it's not syntax highlighted just yet? Most people. Once you save, so I'm going to do Control S, or you can do File Save, however you want to do this. And then let's call this, we're going to do a few examples today. Let's call this ex1.html. And then as soon as we do that, we see the syntax highlighting show up. In this case, because we don't have any CSS or anything that interesting, it's just we can see that our tags are blue. That's about it. Did we go through the process one more time?
I couldn't hear. I just missed what you labeled it.
Okay, yeah, so ex1.html. And you've probably explored these things before, but they have nice little kind of visual cues. Like, notice here that if I click my paragraph, it automatically shows me my closing tag for that paragraph. So it's kind of useful. If anybody here has brackets, there's a really, really useful plugin. I'm sorry, they call them extensions. Let's see if I can get zoomed in here. So there's a little something, I don't know, is that supposed to be like a Lego block? I guess, I don't know. But you click this extension manager, and there is an extension called Beautify that automatically, and actually I already have it installed, but you just type the word Beautify into the search. So I'll do that one more time and try not to move too quickly. So under Extension Manager, click that. Search. There's an extension called Beautify, and it just makes your code, it literally does that. It makes it more visually readable. Okay, so I already have mine installed. I'm not going to mess with it because I don't want to. Last time I clicked update in brackets, a lot of things broke. And so what's nice about it is, I don't know if you know kind of the general coding rules. One of the visual rules is that if you have nested tags or things nested, that you should probably indent them. And right now that's not the case. So if I go to edit, I scroll down here, I see a little button for beautify. And you'll notice it did a lot of indentation for me. And this makes code a lot easier to read. Especially if you have a lot of code that's like very nested code. I'll show you in a second why this is important. And there's actually another feature, which is kind of cool, that you can actually just beautify on save. So every time you save, it just automatically does that for you. It's kind of a useful thing. Okay, so while everyone's doing that, go ahead and just to be sure, preview your page. So again, everyone's different editor is going to have different ways. In brackets, there's this little, I think it looks kind of like a lightning bolt. If you click this, it'll bring up a web browser. There's not going to be much to look at, but it appears to display something, so it looks like we're on the right track. So there's all these different HTML5 cheat sheets out there where, let me take a step back. So in the older versions of HTML, they didn't have nearly as many tag names. And in HTML5, they wanted to kind of, so there's a habit, everyone here knows the div tag, right? Div is just very generic, div just stands for division. A lot of developers, myself included, have this habit of anytime you have content, put it inside of a div. If you've got something that's a header, put it inside of a div. If you've got something that's a footer, put it inside of a div. If you've got something that's navigation, put it inside of a div. This causes some problems. A, for screen readers, because a screen reader doesn't know what the heck a div does. Div is just very generic. So what they created is a lot of new tags in HTML5, like header, footer, nav. There's quite a number of these. And we kind of try to prefer those. It can be difficult sometimes to remember all of them. I think I put a, let's see how decent this cheat sheet is. There's a really good cheat sheet I found a number of years ago, and then somebody took down their website, so this one's halfway decent. So here we can see the different tags for document structure. We talked about H1 through H6 already. Div, span. Span, is span inline or block level? Inline, yeah. It's actually very common. That's really the main difference between div and span, is that div is block level. So if, say, for example, you have a block of text and you want a new line at the end, you would put it into a div. If you wanted to do something inline where you didn't want that jump to a new line afterwards, you would just do the same exact thing, just using span. We already talked about paragraph. We're going to avoid break and horizontal rule if we can. Here's some others: strong, bold, and so on. You already know which to avoid. You can see some of these new, let me see if I can find a good example here. Article tag was a big addition. Let's see if I can find something with article. Yeah, this cheat sheet doesn't explain article that well. I do have a dedicated link in here just to talk about article. Okay. So like there's a new tag in HTML5. How many people have worked with article before? A lot of these tags aren't actually that difficult to work with. It takes like maybe 2 minutes to learn what they do, and then you just use them. So not knowing anything about the article tag, what do you think you put inside of an article tag? Exactly, yeah. So think in your head, okay, article. What do I typically see on a news site? Well, news site will typically have like some sort of title and then some paragraphs of content. Okay, so that's probably the most common use of article. And in 30 seconds, you just learn how to use article. Okay, that's how a lot of these tags are, is that they're not that terribly difficult to use. You just kind of go through, and this site's actually somewhat advanced. But here they have footer. If you knew nothing else about footer, you could probably figure out what a footer is in about 30 seconds. There are some of these that are slightly more involved. You probably are new. This is again review, so I'm going through some of this kind of quickly. Okay, so any questions on this? Everyone was able to paste in their HTML into their editor and view the page. Okay, so I'm going to pick up the pace a little bit. Hopefully your minds are a little bit refreshed. I know today was the first day of class and you're already getting thrown into some coding, but so let's do file, new. I realize coding a lot of this boilerplate stuff from scratch every time might be a lot. So there's all these different HTML shells out there. I might have linked to one. Otherwise, you can just Google for it. There's one, I think it's got like a turtle shell. It's just called HTML shell. And that way, if you don't want to type in all this stuff, you just go to HTML shell. It's very easy to make minor syntax errors on some of these things in the ordering, so you can cheat. So in this case, htmlshell.com. I just highlighted some HTML. And then we're going to make a new file and then paste that in there. We actually don't care about this meta character set. You can leave it if you want. It's not going to hurt anything, but if you don't understand what it means, don't worry about it. So I've pasted in just some boilerplate HTML. It doesn't do anything just yet. And then let's call this ex2.html. And then let me go ahead and run the beautify on this. I don't know if it actually ran correctly. There we go. Now most HTML tags, again, they're very straightforward to use. Like article, you learn how to use article in about 30 seconds. Header, footer, aside, block quote. What else have I seen over the years? You kind of get the picture. They tend to describe the content. Nav for navigation. There are some that are a little bit different that I always like to spend some extra time on, that you can't just kind of plop it in there and just expect it to work correctly. Sometimes things have to happen in a certain order. Table is an example of those. We try to avoid table if we can. So in the bad old days, what people would do is they would make their entire website a table. And because again, remember back in the late 80s when Tim Berners-Lee made the web, he wasn't thinking about formatting that much. And so people said, he gave us this table tag. Let me put my entire site inside of a table. And you can maybe, if you kind of work your imagination a little bit, see how you could make your entire web page into a table. And there's a lot of cons to that. There's a lot of problems. And then they gave us CSS floats, which solved some problems and caused more problems. To be perfectly honest, the layout problems in HTML and CSS really haven't been fixed until within the last 5 years. So we've really had about a good 20 plus years of exactly, yeah, of really bad tools. They finally fixed it. The three main tools is that they came out with Twitter, created a framework called Bootstrap, and then a lot of people said, hey, there's actually a demand for this stuff, and then the W3C standards body adopted a lot of the things that Bootstrap had done, like grid and so on. But anyway, so let's get back to tables. So you don't use tables for layouts. What do you use tables for? what they call tabular data. If I have, let's think of a good example. If I'm running a swim race and I've got 5 people swimming in the race and I want to, let's do an example like that. That actually works pretty good. Okay. So I've got a table. Now, in HTML, we define tables one row at a time. This is probably different than if you've worked with like Microsoft Word or something like that, where you can, you have this idea of a cell or columns. We don't really talk about things like that. We tend to do table, row, and then within each of that row, we have our data. Okay. So to create a new row, there's a tag here called tr. Just a quick check-in. Everyone can see the code, okay? Okay. And let's keep this simple. Let's just say there's 2 runners running against each other, Alice and Bob, and that's what we're going to have. Say they did 3 laps, and it'll make sense once we've typed it out. Okay. So the first row we typically call the table heading. Okay. So there's 2 types of these table data. There's table data and there's table heading, and we'll see the difference in a second. So here we have th for table heading. And this first table heading is going to say lap number. We can just do lap number like that. And then just to keep things very compact, let's just say Alice was racing Bob. So hopefully you can already see here how it's not as simple as just slapping on an emphasis or something like that. There's a little bit of structure to this that you have to learn. It's not super difficult. Once you've done it a couple times, it's not that tough. And if you ever need help, you can always go back to W3 Schools. They have a whole, I don't want to minimize this so you can still see, but they have a whole article on tables. It's pretty thorough. And it's always a good idea to not write too much code without previewing it, okay? I clicked save and it decided that it didn't like my formatting. That's fine. And it displayed something, nothing that interesting. What we can kind of do is just a quick hack. We don't want to do this long term, but what we can do is we can just set a border. This isn't even CSS border, this is just plain old border. I'm going to set the border to 1. And I am also going to make my font size gigantic so that you really get a sense of what it's going to look like. And then now we switch over to table data because it's not the header for our table. This is the actual data. So this is going to be lap 1. And it doesn't really matter too much what their times are. You can just make up times. That could be in seconds. Who knows? It doesn't really matter. Say 234. We'll keep it simple. We'll just do 2 laps. And just to save a little bit of time, I'm going to copy and paste. Copy, paste, modify. So this is going to be lap 2. And let's see, they're getting a little out of breath here. Oh, okay. I already made a mistake. So what did I forget? So each time we have to make a new table row. That's what I get for coding too much without previewing. So let's just go ahead and fix this. tr / tr tr. Okay. So that should give us, this is the first row, this is the second row, this is the third row. And then now we get something a little bit that looks like a table. This is still review for everybody, right? I haven't touched on anything new. It might just be, you know, a couple of semesters since you've done it, but it's not like completely foreign. Okay. So what I usually do is when I hear the typing slow, then I move on. Does anybody need another 30 seconds or so? Is that a yes? Maybe? Okay. One thing I do too is obviously I record it. If you ever just get super lost on an example that you just kind of need to give up on that example, I always post the code to Blackboard as well. So you can always go back and see where you went wrong in that example. It is good to type it in class because you kind of get that, you know, that muscle memory and kind of just looking at it, you don't necessarily absorb it the same way. But if you're just like, if you've made a mistake that you just can't see where you made the mistake, sometimes it's easier just to grab the code later and compare. Okay, so everybody good? Is that a yes or no? Okay. So let's move on to another example here. Let's go to File, New. Let's grab that HTML shell code again here, paste it in. By the way, if it ever got to the point that we were lecturing long, I would give you a break, but I think we can kind of plow through this without a break because we only have like 2 more examples. One of the examples is a little involved, but I think we're going to be done coding by about 7:15 maybe. Okay. Can you do that without a break, or do you need a break now? Okay. Okay. Okay, so this is going to be ex3.html. Can do this little beautify thing here. Okay, so the next topic is lists. Lists may kind of seem like they were, you know, not that important. Like the first time you learned them, this is probably how you learned lists. Does it? I don't want to be too ahead of myself. Everyone knows about lists and what they are, right? Ordered lists, unordered lists, li, list items. That sounds familiar. Let's do a quick example. So I have a. We'll do OL for ordered list. And then every single thing in there is going to have some sort of order to it. So something like a recipe or directions, that would be a good example. And then each thing in there is called a LI, a list item. And so each of these might be a step. So the first step, put toast in toaster. Don't burn yourself. Eat toast. Maybe that's a silly direction. That's maybe like a little confusing. Toast the toast. Maybe we really need to be specific so nobody tries to eat the toast inside of the toaster. So hopefully this is pretty obvious why this would be an ordered list, right? Because these are directions that need to occur in a certain order. And you can actually see the default styling. We didn't put 1, 2, 3, 4 in front of it. That was just kind of implied because we were doing an ordered list. Just so you know, at any point you can always change a lot of these things with CSS. So if you decide that you want to change your list style type, I think is the property name, you can do all kinds of cool things with this. You can change it to nothing, you can change it to Roman numerals, you can change it to letters. We're going to leave this as is for right now. Let's do an unordered list. So an unordered list would be things that don't have any particular order to them. So a lot of times ingredients, that's the examples I like to give. We're in 4 pairs. Let's make that orange juice. And this should be pretty obvious, hopefully, that the order of the ingredients itself doesn't, like, you know, if they're saying go to your fridge and get eggs and orange juice or whatever, the order you remove those, it doesn't really matter as long as you have those things available. Okay, so that's the difference between an ordered list and an unordered list. And okay, you have that example in isolation. How often are you making recipes on your websites? And in practice, people there's kind of a mental disconnect of when to use ordered lists and unordered lists in your real world website. In your assignment, actually give you a link to, I think it's apple pie or something as an example. But I want to give you more of a real world example of when you would actually use ordered lists and unordered lists. If you have a bunch of if you have a bunch of hyperlinks, everyone here remembers hyperlinks, right? That's going to be the last thing we cover after this. And hyperlinks are typically considered unordered lists. And let's say, for example, I just want to make a bunch of links of all the state colleges and universities in the area. So I might have a list item, and this is going to get a little bit verbose here. Hopefully you can see after looking at this why indentation can be very important. So I've created a new unordered list. I'm making a new list item. That list item is going to contain a link. If this had not been indented, this code would be very, very difficult to read. But this, combined with the syntax highlighting of our text editor, it makes it very, very easy to see what's going on. Okay, they've made an unordered list. Within that, they only have one list item currently, and here's that list item. And we can cheat a little bit. Let's copy and paste. Now going back, can anybody maybe think of a website that you've seen today that uses an unordered list and list items for, actually, let's do this. Let's preview it so we can see what it looks like, and then let's come back to that. So you can see here I've got a bunch of links to different colleges. I'll get this out of the way so you can finish typing if you need to. Can anybody think of an example that you might have seen on a real-world website where that's used? So obviously under the quick links, that'd be a good example. I don't know if they specifically use unordered lists, but this is an example of where you would use it. Sometimes people kind of cheat a little bit and they use other techniques that are whatever. But if I were to code this from scratch, no doubt I would use a unordered list. Now something to think about a little bit. What about the links up here? Do you think you might be able to use an unordered list for these? It's kind of a group of links that are related, right? It's an unordered list of links. Yes, you can. So what you there's a technique that you can actually take a block level element and make it inline. So we're not going to do that today. That's maybe a little bit advanced. I think I screw it up every time I try it anyway. But just because something doesn't necessarily look like an unordered list doesn't mean that it's not the case. What about this? Do you think you could make this into an unordered list? Yeah, just using some clever CSS, you can actually do that. So don't get too caught up in just because it's not bulleted like this, that it's an unordered list or not an unordered list. Anytime you have kind of groups of links together. Let's make one more modification here. There's a tag called nav, and this sort of indicates that this is going to be your site's navigation. And I'll get to why this is an important tag in a second. A lot of these tags aren't strictly necessary in the sense that your website's going to it's still going to display. The nav isn't going to give us any sort of visual advantage. Any advantage that we get of using this nav tag, it's going to be purely about the structure. Remember we talked about that earlier? It looks the exact same. But the advantage is that for anybody with disabilities, so a lot of people with disabilities, especially visual disabilities, need to use something called a screen reader. The screen reader goes through and it tries to decide what's most important on the page to read. On a very busy page with dozens of links and all kinds of text and stuff, it might be a little bit difficult for the screen reader to decide what's most appropriate to read. When I hit a site, typically the types of things that are most important are going to be your headings, your H1s, maybe the site's navigation. So if I wrap my navigation inside of this nav tag, the screen reader says, this is some sort of navigation. Navigation is probably important. Let me read this first. The other reason, and maybe to a slightly lesser extent, is a lot of modern search engines, especially Google, can do stuff with this information. So if you have a well-coded web page, a lot of times Google can go into your page, and you've probably seen this before, where you go to Google something, and it actually kind of pokes into the website. Like, let's say, for example, I'm trying to download a piece of software like brackets. And I type in brackets, and they have the main web page, but it also says, maybe you want downloads, maybe you want some of these other common navigation items. So, and that's what's called SEO, search engine optimization. If you have a very clean coded web page, a lot of times you're making the search engine's life as easy as possible. And so by doing that, you kind of make your site show up on search engines a little bit better, okay? But that's all I want to talk about as far as that. As far as your assignment goes, you actually only have to do one of these simple lists. But I just wanted to show you that this is a very common thing to throw in this navigation. Okay, deep breath. We have one more example to do. I know everyone's probably very tired of coding. Typically, actually, the lectures will be a little bit shorter. I just wanted to really get the review out of the way. That way we can start doing interesting stuff. Sometimes in the past, we've spent as much as a month on review, and then it makes it so that we can't do, we have to cut some other stuff out. So I want to try to keep review this semester just down to 2 weeks. Okay, so last thing is going to be hyperlinks. And let's do this. Let's give hyperlinks its own dedicated folder. Is everybody good with this before we move on? Everybody's got it all typed out and everything? Okay, cool. So let's go back to whatever folder you've been using. So I've got my CGS4828 folder inside of today's date. And just because we're going to make a couple of files that are related, and I want to kind of keep them grouped all together. So I'm actually going to make a separate folder, and I'm just going to call it links or hyperlinks, whatever you like better. Oops. Okay, and let's grab our HTML shell. Make a new page, paste it in. But now we're going to save it somewhere a little bit different. We're not going to save it, you know how we had our EX1, EX2, EX3? Let's go inside of that links, and let's give it a very special name. Let's call it index.html. So I want to be inside of that links folder that I just created, and I'm going to call it index.html. Just out of curiosity, does anybody know why index.html is a special name? Exactly, yeah. If you ever put your files on a web server, the first place it looks for is index.html. That's why we can type in www.irsc.edu instead of having to type in www.irsc.edu/index.html. It just assumes that if you have a file in there called index.html, that's the first place it's going to look. So we've already done a very simple hyperlink. We do href, http //www.irsc.edu. And this thing right here, this is called a URL, Uniform Resource Locator. Maybe we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail another time. I want to get through this kind of quick so nobody falls asleep on me. And this is what's known as an absolute URL. It has basically all the information it needs. So I click here, and it's going to take me to the IRC website. And let's do this. Let's just kind of pick a theme here so the site makes a little bit more sense. Let's add an H1. Let's just say you're creating a personal web page. It's just going to be about me. And you can write IRC. Here's my college. Now let's create another page, and we can be a little bit lazy here. We can copy and paste our HTML that we just did. We'll just do a copy, paste, modify. And let's say, for example, this page is going to contain your hobbies. And let's get rid of this for now. And you could put some paragraphs in here if you wanted. These are my And we want to save that in a special place. We want to save it inside the same folder as our index.html. So the folder structure is very important for this example. So we want to save it in the same folder as our index.html. And we're going to call this, I guess, just hobbies.html. So I don't want to move too fast on this because I lose people on this sometimes. So right now we have 2 pages. We have index.html. That's just going to be kind of our landing page where when they first hit the page and they see all the information, you know, about me. And then we have a secondary page called hobbies. Neither page really contains very much so far. If I wanted to link, so let's bring this up here. If I have 2 files in the same folder, and I'm at index.html, and I want to link to hobbies.html, what would I type here? Ahref what? And I want this to point to hobbies.html. Exactly. And so this is called a relative link. And actually, you can see that brackets cheated for us a little bit. If the file is on the same server and in the same directory, you don't have to do anything special. All you have to do is type in the file name. Okay, again, so if the file's on the same server, and just if you're working on your computer, it's going to be on the same server, and it's in the same folder, all you have to do is type in the file name. This is called, so you're saying relative to my current location. This is called a relative link. Relative to my current location, where is the file? And you don't have to do anything other than that. You're just saying it's in the same folder, so it's just in the same spot. And let's just test this to make sure it works. It's not the greatest, but okay. Now I want you to take a second. We could wrap this in an unordered list if you want, just to save time. Let's just kind of move on here. Take about 30 seconds, and I want you down here to link back to your home page. Okay. So you're on the hobbies page, and you know that's pretty common. You have a link that says back to home. Take about 30 seconds and see if you can make a back to home link. We're almost done. We just have to cover this, and then relative links, and then we're done for the night. Okay, who wants to walk me through it? What do I have to type? Yeah.
I was just saying to like we did with the hobbies, instead of creating the index HTML instead.
Perfect. Just like that. Oops. We always have to be careful. It's got to be index.html. Always have to be careful about file extensions. And Professor Gibson goes over this idea of relative paths in pretty great detail, right? So this is not something super new. Okay. I just want to make sure you know about it, because this is one of the most common mistakes I see, is that people get kind of like, they don't know where their files are, and they do weird things with their links, and it seems like it works on my computer, but then I put it on the server and it doesn't work. So it's an important topic. Okay. And we click this, and it takes us back home. I guess we can. This one time we can cheat. Oh, let's just wrap it to paragraph. How about that? It's a little bit less ridiculous. So I'm back on my index page. All I did was wrap these in a couple of paragraphs, make it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so final thing we have to talk about is relative paths. And the idea is, so we've been talking about relative paths. I should say relative paths where you have to deal with different directories. So let's do this. Let's go back to our links folder that we made earlier. We've got our hobbies.html, index.html. And a very common thing to do is if you have like a site where there's going to be a bunch of pages or a bunch of content, rather than having a flat structure where you put everything in one folder, you kind of group things together. And so say, for example, you've got, you want to dedicate a different page to each member of your family. You want to have a page for your mom. You want to have a page for your dad, for your grandpa, your grandma, and so on. So you might have 15 different pages. Rather than having it as a very flat structure, you might want to create a dedicated folder called family. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's make a new folder called family. So I'm still inside of links here. There's our hobbies, our index, and then now we've got our family folder. So now let's do this. Let's make a new page, and let's say this is your first page you want to dedicate to your mom. So just copy and paste. And then this page you want to put inside of links, inside of family, and we want to call it mom.html. And then let's modify this for right now. Let's just write mom. So make sure you have this structure correct. Hold on. Just gonna close all these. So you've got a folder called links, and that's where we're working right now. We've got our two pages, our hobbies and our index, and then we just created another folder called family. And inside of family, we created that page mom.html. Is everybody good in that structure? So now if I'm back, and then all I did was just modify this to say mom. If I'm back at my index.html, and I want to link to the mom page, what do I put inside of the double quotes right here? Exactly. So we do family, and you can actually already see here brackets is giving us the clue. So I'll leave this up here for a second. We do one more page, and then we're done. Okay, so I think I maybe lied a little bit about it, the time we'd be done, but not by much. So what's happening is when I'm on this page, when I'm on index.html, this is where I am. I'm inside of this links folder. I'm right here. If I want to link to a page inside a family, what I have to do is I have to say, okay, from the current folder, go into the family folder before you can get to the mom page. So one more time, when we're on our index.html page, if I want to visit the mom page, I have to go into the family folder, and that's what we've done here, is that we've said, I'm at the index.html page, and then go into the family folder, and then go to the mom page. So that's how you go into a folder. You click here, and you can see how it took us inside here. Now it's family mom. Now the very last thing is that if we try to click this back home, it's going to be broken. We get a 404 error, can't find that. So let's go over to mom.html. So this one's a little bit tricky because we're inside of this folder called family. If I'm at the mom page, I want to somehow get back here. And so does anybody know how to do that? How to go what's called up a directory? Yes?
You have to do the same thing, but you're putting links.
Say that again.
Like, are we pretty much repeating the links?
There's a special character.
Oh, special character.
What's that? Exactly, yeah. Sorry, I didn't hear you. I heard two, and I thought it might be correct. But yeah, exactly. So under mom.html, let's do this. Let's get rid of this stuff. What's known as going up a directory, what you have to do is you have to do two dots. You do ... and it's saying go up one directory. And now we can say, okay, we go up a directory, we can see our index.html page. And you're not stuck to doing this one time. You can go in 5 folders and up 5 folders if you need to, okay? This is probably by far one of the most common reasons that I see broken links is that people get messed up with relative links, and you can make relative links that work on your computer that when you upload it to a website it doesn't work, but we'll worry about that later. Okay, so that's it for today. Let's just very quickly click that to make sure it actually works. So I click mom, back home, and magically we can see it takes us back to our About Me page, okay? So if at any point you get lost on a particular page, I will post all this to Blackboard. I may not get to it tonight. As I already mentioned, the lecture is recorded, so I'll have that all set up and posted hopefully kind of soon. Let's very briefly go over this assignment. So you technically have 2 weeks for this assignment. Since it's the first week of class, maybe we can just break here early. I know that's pretty common, especially if somebody enrolls in the class and they're going to be really far behind. So I think we're maintaining a pretty good pace that we could maybe start this assignment next week. Maybe just look over it in the next week. Is everybody okay with that? Okay. And it's pretty straightforward. It's just kind of like it's just like a directions-based type thing. I might need to clean up some of I copied and pasted it from a previous semester, so I think some of this stuff jumbled together. But the basic idea is that there's you're going to create 4 pages, or it's kind of 4 parts to this. So a very simple page that all you do is you have an H1 tag, and it just says My Demo Page. And then you create a paragraph with lorem ipsum text. Everyone, do you know how to use lorem ipsum text? Okay. If not, I'll show everybody next week. It's not anything tough. Then I want you to make an HTML page of your class schedule. If this is the only class you're taking, just make up classes, you know. Just kind of fill it out with 3 or 4 classes. That way you can kind of get a visually, like I know you know how a table works, okay? And then there's a recipe for apple pie. Do the unordered list, order list type thing. So for the ingredients, use a unordered list, and then for the directions, use an ordered list. You don't have to get overly crazy with it. It's like maybe 10 ingredients and 5 steps or something like that. That's all I'm really looking for. And then part 4, this is what throws a lot of people off. It's basically what we just did. So there's going to be an index page and a products folder. And inside of that products folder, you're going to have 2 different pages. And then so I explain how that works from here. And then we're also going to have an image in there. We're going to have an images folder, and you're going to do the IMG tag. Okay.
Safe to assume that the top 3 parts are separate folders?
What you can do is these 1, 2, and 3 are simple enough that you can do in a single file. Meaning that you can have part 1.html, part 2.html, part 3.html. Part 4 is complicated enough that I would dedicate its own little folder.
Yeah.
Okay, and I'll clean this up, but this just gives you directions on what each thing should say. A lot of these examples at first are just kind of made up. We're just pretending we have some sort of restaurant that sells different food items or something. It doesn't really matter too much what it is. It's more about the structure, okay? Okay, I know I gave you a lot the first week. Any questions? Does anybody feel uncomfortable about the pacing? I know this is probably very different. Is this the first class that you've kind of done code in class like this? No? Okay, so that's good. It's not new for anybody. I want to make sure I'm not missing anything. Everyone did attendance, right? That's really important. Because I won't see you for a week, and I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing anything. Everyone's comfortable with a text editor?
Brackets is so much easier than just using
Yeah.